I'd like to give a brief content warning before I start this episode. This episode is going to contain brief discussions of ableism and racism, as well as discussions of sexual violence. If any of those themes, for any reason, mean that you don't feel like you can sit through this episode, I won't blame you if you skip this one. Hello, my name is Amber, and this is You Look Like a Badger, a podcast where I discuss queer cinema. So, season 4 has been dedicated to discussing the worst rated LGBT themed movies according to various ratings on various websites. And I'm bringing them here for fun and laughs, and also to see if any kind of meaning can be wrenched from them. And the results have varied. Today, however, I'm bringing you something very, very special. And in some sense, it's kind of the movie that I personally was meant to find and discuss with you here today. And that movie is called Another Gay Movie.
We're all going to college. Virgins.
Brainstorm, boys. We just need to make a pact. We all get laid before the end of the summer.
As if we haven't been trying already.
We don't know shit about anal.
Maybe we've been taking the wrong approach. Maybe what we need is someone to teach us.
Certainly logical. But who?
College guys. Older dudes. Men with experience. Studs who can break us in and show us how to kick it right.
Ooh, I'm beginning to like this idea. I mean, guys our age are sexually and emotionally immature anyway.
Our very virginity is at stake here, fellas. This is it, this summer. This is our chance to make all our fantasies come true! Yes!
Another Gay Movie is a parody of high school sex comedies written and directed by Todd and starring exclusively gay characters who are all trying to lose their anal virginity. Both messy and fascinating, it's a film that seeks to interrogate the overwhelming straightness of the genre it's making fun of by explicitly queering long-standing and often creepy tropes that have come to make it up. Whilst not perfect, I think that this film is incredibly transgressive in its depiction of sex and gay male identity, managing to not lose its sincerity in all the puerile antics. In terms of awards, it was nominated as the trashiest entry at 2007's Golden Trailer Awards, and Michael Carbonaro, who is the actor who plays Andy in the movie, won the 2006 Grand Jury Award for Best Actor at LA Outfest. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a critic score of 50% and an audience score of 62%. I believe in 2021, there was a re-release and a director's cut as like an anniversary edition, which I think brought the film to a new audience of people who was able to like reappraise it. Hence why the score on here is like slightly, not even slightly, it's a lot better than some of the films that I've discussed on this podcast before. Still, on Letterboxd it has a 2.6, which isn't great. It is technically above average, but it's still not fantastic. Let's read some reviews. David Klein Sucks says, "What Ted Cruz thinks gay people are actually like." This is the top review on Letterboxd. I think it's very interesting that in people's minds, the perceived like civility and image problems that conservatives tend to have with gay people are still kind of at the forefront of people's minds. So in adhering to the worst stereotypes, it's seen as like letting down the team. So with work that's like too sexual or kind of trashy and campy, or is just like uninterested in writing like moral and child-friendly gay characters, that it's like letting down the team. And my personal opinion is what Ted Cruz thinks of gay people is something I'm really, really uninterested in. And it's not just because I'm British and I literally am not invested in American politics at all. That there are certain people's opinions who are so misinformed and so cruel that it becomes impossible to hold any kind of respect for them. Once again, completely uninterested in what conservatives believe about what gay people should behave like. Because, like, who the fuck cares, you know? This next review is by Kyle, who says, actually hilarious and perfectly crude. This is this is pure fucking faggotry. Any gays in the reviews who find this bad or offensive are the same ones who enjoy the new Queer Eye show. So once again, this review is kind of engaging with what gay people should be looking like and the kind of art that tends to appeal to gay people in reality. Because, like, obviously this film is a very heightened reality where gay teenagers don't experience homophobic abuse and are able to explore their sexualities in incredibly disgusting detail. And I think to some people there is still this kind of worry that the gaze of the straight audience is always just gonna be hovering over that experience, so you have to, like, consider their opinions when, like, once again, it shouldn't really matter. And I like that this film is just like, I'm not really interested in what straight people think about how gay men fuck each other, you know? Like, who cares? This last review is by a user called I Know, who says, it's like gay porn when you cut all the actual sex scenes and you're left with nothing but the silly plot. I know this is like, it's meant to be like a glib review where, like, if you want to emphasize that someone's acting is bad, you compare it to acting in pornography, which is like, whatever, but I kind of don't feel like this person was paying attention to the film, because there's a lot of sex in it, actually, like a lot. Like, what sex scenes were cut? This is mostly sex, actually. Sometimes your quippy review does also need to make sense for the film that you're reviewing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That is the end of the spoiler-free section. If you haven't seen this movie and you would like to, and you don't want me to spoil it for you, here is your spoiler warning now. Go and watch it. I would genuinely recommend watching it. It's a lot. It's a lot as a movie. And it is a little bit formless, and it is very over the top, but there is going to be something interesting to get from it. Like, there's a lot that's very transgressive here, and, you know, we're going to discuss it. Go do that now and then come back.
I didn't hear you. You didn't come home. What's going on?
I think I like guys.
Duh! What took you so long?
I'm going to ask the question, what is the function of spoofing a genre movie and making it gay? The answer to this question is probably going to seem a little bit obvious, but we'll get there slowly, because I like to talk, so I'm going to do that. There's a really good video that I think I might have referenced on this podcast before, by a channel called Headache, and it basically just breaks down the timeline of the modern spoof movie. Another gay movie sits between spoof and parody, where it's a little more interested in, like, the structure of these kinds of movies than a spoof would be, but at the same time it retains the more absurd elements of a spoof, which is what this video kind of breaks down and suggests that a spoof movie operates in an alternate universe where reality bends around what is funniest, and this can kind of appear in films as like random, it can appear in like dream sequences or cutaways and diverge from like a traditional plot, but the point is to make the funniest joke in that moment with little regard of forward momentum or cause and effect. Not another teen movie in a lot of ways. There are a lot of influences on another gay movie, but in my mind, Not Another Teen Movie kind of is at the center of these kinds of movies where you are just kind of jamming references in and molding them around what jokes you have. And there's an added layer of that when something is a bit gay. So David Ehrlich wrote an article about Not Another Teen Movie for Little White Lies, where he basically broke down what the appeal of the spoof movie is. So I'm going to just read a little bit from that. Spoofs, by their very nature, are always looking at the past over their shoulder. Their humour appeals to audiences of the present by tracing an ironic distance between them and the absurdities that they used to accept at face value. Satire has always been how culture sheds its skin, and parodies are an integral part of film history thanks to their unique ability to help us forgive ourselves for the silliness we once took seriously. An effective parody will put a moratorium on a form of filmmaking, and the best of them will find a way to lovingly eulogize the same tropes that once brought their audience some joy. The spoof exists to take a look at genre, comb through it, see what is kind of ridiculous about it, see what can be mined for jokes, and present it to the audience who is seemingly very, very aware on the genre and is going to be ready to accept those jokes with open arms. What is special about Another Gay Movie is that it's specifically queering an incredibly straight genre to the point where homophobia is essentially absent. And for a movie from the 2000s, that's kind of astonishing to do, and honestly divergent from the sex comedy in general. At times when you do seek to queer a genre, it is to point out how homophobic it was in the first place. But I think what's really interesting is that this film simply exists to embrace how these stories can look once you step back from particular kinds of prejudice. Now, that's not to say that this film abandons all of its prejudice, and we'll get to it. In an interview that Todd Stevens did for AV Club, he said the following: "At the time, so many gay films took themselves so seriously, and so much of the conflict was the very fact of being gay. They were coming out stories. So I wanted to make a movie where being gay wasn't the conflict. It's just these teenagers trying to get laid like any other teenager wants to do. I wanted to take a step back and have a moment where we could laugh at ourselves. I thought there was something revolutionary about having a stupid movie for gay people." And I think that is the other element where spoof movies allow this kind of laughter that once it's coming from the in-group rather than coming down from straight people, you get very niche references, you get very niche jokes, and you get to be able to laugh at stuff that maybe a mainstream audience wouldn't even know could be funny in the first place, because it's not something they'd ever consider even making a joke about in the first place. As with any kind of postmodern text, you have this lacing of references that exist for the audience to revel in. This is very much a movie that wants you to point at the screen and be like, that's from Carrie, or that's from American Pie, which a lot of this movie is from, or there are elements of a John Waters movie in this film that I'm watching. When you open your movie with Andy masturbating using vegetables, it is a very explicitly queer homage to the opening of American Pie, when Jim is trying to watch scrambled porn on his TV and his parents keep walking in. When you have like Andy's mother being played by a drag queen, that seems like a a pretty obvious reference to John Waters and Divine, and how a lot of the quote-unquote hysterical women in John Waters' movies were played by Divine. It works to inject the movies with a diversity that feels seamless. Like, it's not asking the audience for too much. Like, if you've seen these movies, you understand the references. The references themselves are allowing an opening into the movie, and then the queerness kind of is what is snuck in with that. I say it's being like snuck in, as if this movie isn't some of the most explicit and disgusting stuff. It's not as if these kinds of movies at their worst weren't as disgusting and explicit, you know. I think there is this idea that queerness is like inherently more perverse. Considering some of the movies that I had to watch in research for this, I don't know if that's actually true. When you use like American Pie as a blueprint, you're able to actually inject some really affirming stuff in there as well. So there's a part where Andy is 2 legs in the air, shaving his asshole in his bedroom using a handheld mirror, and his dad walks in, and what we get is like a parody of the magazine porn scene from the first American Pie, except it's his dad coming in, giving him a massive butt plug and a book on anal pleasure. Much like the dad in American Pie, he's incredibly sex positive. He's curious about his son and wants to keep him safe and wants to give him as much information as possible. And I think where in that movie it is treated as cringe, but ultimately quite heartwarming, the relationship they have with one another. In this movie, I think the feeling that you would be able to talk with your dad about gay sex feels like so otherworldly to a lot of people. You know, maybe for good reason, but the idea that your dad would be so accepting that he has stuff prepared, it entirely flips the heteronormative idea of how fathers are meant to relate to their teenage sons, because there is obviously like a masculinizing process of giving your son pornography in the hopes that he will be heterosexual and work out what to do from there. But the idea that a father's gone, okay, so my son's gay, I guess I better learn everything about being gay, to the point where this character eventually realizes that he's bisexual himself. Like the whole arc of the dad character, who is not even one of the main characters, is really nice and heartwarming. And once again, this is a movie from 2006, a very bad time in America for gay people. It's this idea that it's so like utopian that it becomes like really sweet. And I like the idea of a film being so sexual and heartwarming at the same time. The function, in my opinion, of the gay spoof or the gay parody is to put up a mirror to what the straight elements of these stories would be. Not necessarily to laugh at them specifically, but to point out how when gay people do these stories, they end up feeling very, very transgressive, and they work to open up these stories to include people who would not have been thought of otherwise. And I know, like, from the way I'm describing it, it sounds like a very dry and dour experience, but it genuinely manages to keep being funny throughout this process. And that's very hard, especially considering how comedy has treated gay people up to and beyond this point in history.
So, Jared, did you ever, like, you know, get to third base, like, finger someone?
Yeah, of course.
What's it feel like?
Like warm quiche rain.
in this next section talk about genre, because it is kind of essential for a parody film, and the specific genre that this film chooses to parody is also quite a contentious one, in that the sex comedy is very maligned for good reasons. It's a genre that is pretty much universally lowbrow, relies on like humiliation and masochism as a form of comedy, and will often employ edgy to outwardly offensive humour to get the laughs that it desires. So as Stephen Holden put it in the New York Times when writing about American Pie, it's a genre that beckons us with a leer and a crooked finger to revisit those thrilling days of lust and disgust and laugh at our own pubescent body shame. And for the most part, these are incredibly heterosexual and often centre teenage boys. You will get the occasional adult sex comedy, but a lot of them are about teenagers coming of age using their sexuality. As Bill Osgerby put in the book American Pie, The Anatomy of Vulgar Teen Comedy, these films are characterized by a brazenly over-the-top humor rooted in the salacious, the scatological, and the squirmingly tasteless. When it comes to queerness, I think a decent argument could be made that when gay people have featured in this genre, it has specifically been as a contrast to straightness or disgust. And that tends to come from, just the average homophobia in society, but also this idea that gay people are on a different level of perverted. So when a sex comedy tends to invoke queerness, it usually falls within the gay or trans panic parameters, as opposed to gay people experiencing the average humiliations that come with trying to work out your sexuality and what it is you actually want from sex. The Celluloid Closet, which is kind of a key academic text, and there is also a documentary about it using Vito Russo's book as a jumping off point to talk about different movies. But it posits that gay people throughout the history of film have been viewed as inherently perverted and something as dangerous and scary, which I think we have talked about a couple of times on this podcast. One thing that I've definitely noticed, especially with like the sex comedies that I grew up watching in the early 2000s, I think it was more, not the homophobic panic of these characters was absent, but that trans people, specifically trans women, were more the punchlines to jokes seen as like inherently dangerous or a threat to heterosexual masculinity. Thankfully, that has mostly gone away. I wouldn't say the sex comedy is a very prolific genre, but most explicit forms of that kind of transphobia are relegated to reactionary / very conservative material. What I would say is that when going about trying to reclaim this genre, it is telling what needs to be retained in order to get the audience on board with the different tropes and what can be discarded in the reimagining. You probably won't know this, but a couple of years ago, I did actually write about the politics of the sex comedy. I wrote about it on my website. Going back to read my old writing is a little bit scary for me because I'm always somewhat convinced that I've either spread some misinformation or my opinion is just bad. But this was a mostly okay article. If I were to rewrite it today, it would be a lot better, a lot less defensive, I think. But I was operating from a place of, this is a genre that I find very interesting and that I think could be great, but so many entries within it are very misogynistic and homophobic and transphobic and racist and ableist and all of the words. So it's hard to engage with them in good faith and hard to look seriously at the way that they transgress ideas about sex and sexuality when they're so marred with edgy people trying to, pick the lowest hanging fruit and not really engaging with the reality of what it is they're insinuating. I'm gonna discuss it a bit later, but the lack of consent that the sex comedy tends to operate from is troubling, but it also, at the same time, I'm not one to argue that depiction is necessarily endorsement. However, most of the depictions of non-consensual activity in these kinds of movies is meant to be titillating and in fact played for laughs. That's the essence of the sex comedy, that a lot of the time, especially with men in sex comedies, sexual assault against men is meant to be funny, and unfortunately this film also falls into that. I have drifted off a little bit. I'm going to get back to my article because I'm going to do something shameless and I'm going to quote myself because I think it is kind of relevant to what I have been saying. Regarding the politics of the sex comedy, they often explore the horror adolescent straight boys have about their own sexuality in relation to their masculinity, and in many ways these characters feel disempowered in how they view themselves, unable to express these insecurities without being viewed as effeminate or being emasculated by their peers. The characters choose to exert what power they do have, the power to laugh at those they themselves view as odd, the racial other, queerness, disability, and especially women. These movies are less about pleasure and more about the masochism of adolescence. Now, I would argue that within that article, that's probably the best quote you're going to get. Not that I think my analysis was fine, I just think I got a little bit too bogged down in identity politics, and I wish I'd kind of explored genre tropes, made like a little bit of a defense of the work, because I do think it is a valuable genre. I think any genre that is able to like spectacleize sex in a way that transforms it into something less heightened, less like on a pedestal, and more very, very human, very tactile. And I think when you have a genre that is so obsessed with like fluids and weird slapstick comedy and stuff that just doesn't appear in your average film, or maybe even in your average day-to-day, it takes sex and turns it into something just less terrifying to think about. And I think when you are a gay teenager trying to conceptualize of a normative kind of sex, it doesn't quite compute, because you will have seen a textbook of a cis woman and a cis man lying on top of each other, and your teachers will have pointed to that and been like, that's sex. And that's even if you've had a good sexual education. Like, the bare minimum is you're going to be taught a very heteronormative and cis-normative version of sex that isn't based on pleasure, and it turns it into something both singular and otherworldly, but also daunting. And I think being able to take that and just be like, it's just a load of fluids, it's just skin, it's just like a weird thing that we jam ourselves together. And it benefits the audience to treat it with a kind of air that it's not that serious. And in fact, our attempts to make it serious are what cause us to face the humiliations that are often depicted. What you'll notice if you watch a few of these kinds of movies in a row is that they're a little bit formless. They're kind of episodic. They will often have like an ensemble cast, though there obviously are like the rare ones that focus on one protagonist. But it'll be different characters doing different kinds of sex-based activities or attempts at sex. They will be rejected often. There'll be different kinds of hijinks and pranks, some of which do include like sexual harassment. And ultimately, this will lead to all of our characters having a successful sexual experience. Or if you're in Porky's, it will lead to you tearing down a bar with a couple of trucks. Don't even get me started on Porky's. We're not talking about that today. But it is kind of an outlier in that there is no focus to this movie. It's a bad film. I'm not discussing it. We're moving on. These movies work to foreground taboo. So one of the first things that we see in the movie is Andy having a student-teacher fantasy. It's a very common sexual fantasy. Obviously, it's transformed a bit because it is between a male teacher and a male student. And whilst I think you could argue there's a lot problematic in this movie, you definitely could argue that. What I will say is it's not a movie that's interested in politeness. It is more interested in actualizing a series of fantasies that may seem unobtainable and that have been kind of stigmatized, especially with regards to gay teachers, right? That has been historically a quite significant sore point, I think, for the gay community, where there is a history of accusing teachers who are out as gay in public of being perverts and pedophiles. So when you, in your movie, take a quite a common sexual fantasy for people, you know, one of you's a student, the other one's a teacher, and, you know, you get fucked by your teacher in front of the class. I think in a vacuum, it's interacting with a sore subject and also taking a common sexual fantasy and kind of mashing them together, and very brazenly and without kind of the like need to feel polite about it, allowing this character to explore a sexual fantasy in, you know, in the safety of his own head. Andy is a secret but enthusiastic bottom. He hides this from his friends, but he's quite enthused about getting fucked by his teacher, or fucked by anyone really. But it allows this kind of exploration that isn't really shown. Someone being like enthusiastic about getting fucked in the arse as like a gay man, that doesn't exist that much in the mainstream, you know? And I think there is like a lot of stigma around bottoming. It comes up in the movie. At the same time, it works as representation, but it also works to be like, this is probably just like a version of being a gay teenager. If the only access to gay sex is in your imagination, then of course it makes sense to start there. Obviously, the film goes into making a lot of these fantasies a reality, for better and for worse. I do think it is interesting to just simply engage with sexuality where it's at. And I think that is where the sex comedy is at its strongest. Where the film is at its weakest, in my opinion, is when it chooses to retain the more prejudiced aspects of the sex comedy without really doing anything to subvert or comment on them. This is in fact a parody, a spoof. You know, some hijinks and some shenanigans go on. At the same time, whether it's fair or not, if you are from a minority group, understanding the extent that having a literal blind character who can't see that her boyfriend is an effeminate gay man, or your only Asian character is speaking in an accented voice when the actress doesn't speak like that, it shows spots in the knowledge, and it shows that there are weaknesses in the parody where so much attention is being paid to subverting the teen experience that there isn't a firm enough grasp on what to discard, simply because the writers don't know how to make jokes about that. This is not to say that the baby needs to be thrown out with the bath, because I think there is still a lot that's very transgressive here. And in an interview that the cast of the movie did with the AV Club, they kind of asked Todd Stevens and Angela Oh, who played Tiki, the Asian cheerleader who I was talking about before. So I'm just going to quote them and what they had to say about it, then I'll discuss it from there. So Todd Stevens said the following: "From the director's cut, I called up Angela and we attempted to revoice her to make her sound more like a Valley girl. We did an ADR session to try to replace the original stereotypical voice, and it just didn't work. It didn't fit right. I wouldn't do that again. I feel badly about it. It's like at the time the industry felt like making fun of Asians was the last acceptable group of people to make fun of, which is disgusting to me. So I feel like I'm guilty of that." And this next part is Angela O. "I was excited for Tiki because I had been in improv classes studying at the Harvey Lembeck Comedy Workshop, and I had been working on an Asian character, really embracing the accent and the details, and just how fun an Asian character could be. The thing is, I feel like you can look at the character and be like, oh, she's so stereotypical with an accent. Or you could flip it and think, well, people with accents do exist, and it's also so great that she gets to be a cheerleader. Todd didn't write her as a bookworm or a biology student, you know. For once, I got to play the cheerleader, which I really was in high school." The takeaway is it's complicated and we can't change a movie, it already exists. My opinion is, whilst these more contentious aspects of the sex comedy remain in the genre, they don't really work to parody it, and they are the weaker parts of the story. The parts that I think are the stronger parts, because I'm an infant and I love lowbrow humour, are the parts where people are getting injured and terrible things are happening to them. So one significant moment is the character Jared putting his dick in a penis pump and accidentally mangling it because he can't get it unstuck once he puts it on. And not only is this horrific and hilarious, it once again offers us a moment where Andy's dad gets to come in and, you know, do some affirming masculinity. He reassures them about penis size, how it doesn't matter, and he once again kind of hints at his own queerness. So altogether, it's a very strong part of the movie where it gets to have fun, it gets to do the disgusting parts, but it just injects this level of affirmation in a time that was just very homophobic. And it does feel kind of sad to me that this movie doesn't, like, it has a cult following, is also one of the lowest rated LGBT movies, which is a shame because there's so much about it that is just joyful and affirming and insane, like genuinely insane. I do kind of feel like I'm ping-ponging between different aspects, but the sex comedy is kind of very expansive, and because there is so little like academic material that I could find on it, I'm having to like conjure up theories about what it all means. My main theory that I've been able to like validate with other people's criticisms is that a lot of the sex comedy exists to puncture the preconceived ideas of what sex is going to be like, what it's going to look like. And I do think there is something to the loss of control that comes with entering a form of adulthood, which sex is often coded to be, and allowing yourself to be a little bit humiliated. Now, as with a lot of sex comedies, this does veer into non-consensual areas, as I've spoken about. One of the main scenes that I genuinely kind of hate, I'd say the only part of the film that I really hate, and it's the part where Graham Norton appears, because yes, Graham Norton is in this movie. I think one of the top reviews for this movie on Letterboxd was, do you think Graham Norton ever thinks about this movie? And who knows, I have no clue. The scene that he's specifically in kind of apes Porky's and American Pie, where the lads are using whatever is available to them, either a hole in the wall or a webcam, to spy on people without their consent. So it starts off, they're just looking at people in the showers, then the muffler, Dawn, directs them to a BDSM website where Graham Norton's character, Andy's teacher, runs a site where the audience can pay to punish whoever his submissive is going to be. Andy enters this situation believing he's just gonna casually have sex with a former teacher. He's not anticipating incredibly rough sex where he's going to be tied up, and he's definitely not anticipating having it shared on the internet. Now, if I can talk about this unemotionally, and I promise I'll only do it for a second, I do think there is something to transforming these kinds of scenes into just straight up sexual assault. Specifically, not for the joy or laughter of the audience, but more to parody or materialize the sexual violence that is often present in these movies, but the audience never has to feel the discomfort of. I think a lot of sexual harassment, voyeurism, and stuff like that is couched in this is dirty and naughty, but it is a formative part of the teenage boy experience. In this movie, whilst it is definitely still played for laughs, it is way more graphic, way more prolonged, and for me, honestly, more upsetting. So it does work on a parodic level, even if I hate it. The only part of it that I could give it props for is Graham Norton's character respects the safe word, which has been replaced by a safe horn. So if Andy wants it to stop, he can squeak the horn and he stops, and he respects that. There is something to a movie playing out a non-consensual fantasy for the sake of experiencing a situation where control is completely disappeared. Do I like that it's played for laughs, that we're meant to be laughing at this situation? I don't. I can think about it intellectually and be like, yes, interesting. Emotionally, I'm quite upset. And I don't always think that the intent of these scenes is meant to be emotionally distressed. And I think that is kind of the problem, I suppose, with exploring the grimy depths of the sex comedy, where sexual violence is kind of a normal part of it, even though it shouldn't be. And trying to parody that, you do kind of have to be in conversation with it at the same time.
You still don't get it, do you? Even after all you've been through. I was a stud long before I ever licked a pussy.
Oh, great. A bulldog's gonna instruct us on the art of being men.
Damn right, bitch! When you boys learn that having sex doesn't make you a man, maybe you'll finally pull your pricks out of your poop chutes.
Criminy, kids. I sure do hope you get some ass play.
I've definitely talked about homosociality a lot on this podcast, which makes sense because a lot of the kind of relationships depicted on screen are between people of the same gender. And, you know, we live in a world of binaries where pointing out how different men and women are is only kind of reinforced by same-gender friendship groups, depictions of relationships. It basically comes down to the way that we tend to form our relationships around gender come from the ways that we see ourselves reflected in people of the same gender around us. What you'll find in the sex comedy repeatedly is that they will be populated with young men, typically 4 of them, but, you know, other films have like massive ensemble casts. I brought up Porky's before. There are like 17 different men in that film. I don't know any of their names. It doesn't matter. I think in like the heterosexual sex comedy, it very much functions as a pursuer and pursued kind of situation where you go to your male friends to learn how to interact with women who function as like both mythical and objectified at the same time. Men in cinema often get the kind of treatment where they get to act in ridiculous and irresponsible ways, but also get to be like heroic and heartfelt and have emotional depth at the same time. And that's kind of been the crux of these kinds of stories. When Elliot Grover for Inside Hook discussed American Pie and its relationship to sex comedies. He said this: "The ensemble cast allowed white upper middle class male viewers to identify with at least one of the high school archetypes. Buried under rubbles of raunch, these movies all transmitted heartfelt messages about the importance of male friendship. No matter how hard a character fell or how badly he was humiliated, he could always count on his friends to have his back." How do you approach this with a gay story where not only are, once again, all of the characters men, they're all gay this time? How do you approach that kind of story? And I think there is the advantage of having two of the people in the friendship group become a couple. That's something you can't really do with the straight all-male cast because they're cowards. In a just world, that is something that would be pursued, but it is pursued here. But basically, for the most part, it functions the same in that there is like gentle ribbing and observation of various humiliations, but ultimately this affirming atmosphere, mostly utopian, bar the sexual violence. This is a world free from homophobia. In parodying the teen sex comedy genre, it does put these characters into specific groups. So you have the nerd, you have the jock, you have the femme, and you have the normie, boring one, who ends up being the most into bottoming out of all of them, which I suppose is its own subversion. What this film allows that maybe the other examples in this genre haven't allowed is this kind of playing with gender. And it's not just the two people in this friendship group can now date, it is also a major character in this friendship group can wear a lot of makeup and non-traditionally masculine clothes and still be accepted, still have it be like a normal part of the friendship group. It's not commented on really at all, it's just a part of his identity. The actor Jonah Blackman, when discussing this role, had something like really interesting to say about this kind of portrayal around this time. So he said, "I was petrified of playing Nico, an archetypal queen. I had judgments and my own fear about being seen that way. Some level of queer shame, certainly in my generation, was the queen and the femme. Working with Todd, he calibrated me to bump it up to get to this place that became this incredibly free character. It opened up a space for me to get comfortable with my femininity in a way I never had and blow it out of the water. It inevitably made me more comfortable with my masculinity, having gone so far out with my femininity." It's another example of the ways that when you work to queer a genre piece, you have to interact with the tropes of it. And I think much of the tropes of this genre involve emasculation and the fear of being seen as feminine in any way. The fact that it is a very much naturalized part of this world is incredibly transgressive. Nobody comments on it really at all. There is this like joke about how Nico's mother doesn't seem to know, or he hasn't specifically come out to her yet. And I think there is like a passing comment about how would she not know? And that whole coming out scene for Nico, it is parodying the film Edge of 17, which Todd Stevens also wrote, where the end of that film, spoilers, the end of that film ends with the main character coming out to his mother and her not really reacting that well. It's not overly aggressive or angry, she just seems very sad and disappointed, and the film ends on a very ambiguous note. Here, it's flipped on its head where it essentially mirrors the exact same scene, except this time his mother is like, yeah, obviously. And I have kind of spoken in the past about how I don't really love this reaction to when characters come out, this kind of like dismissive attitude, but I do think within this very heightened context where coming out seems like something that you wouldn't even need to do, because once again, homophobia doesn't really exist in this universe. So the idea that you would need to tell people that you were gay at all is kind of presented as absurd. The only real humiliation and shame part of this movie is that, and I have I've mentioned it a couple of times. There's this kind of stigma against being a bottom, and Andy, who is kind of mostly the main character of the film, ends up lying quite a bit about being a bottom, despite very clearly loving it. Like, the opening of the film is him putting vegetables up his arse. There's a part where he puts a gerbil in his arse. His dad gives him a massive butt plug. Like, all of this kind of works to be like, bottoming is weird, isn't it? And there is still this kind of shame around it. But the film, obviously, it ends with this kind of like, but it's great. So I think it does function differently when it's coming from inside the community. I think in a different context that it could feel way more insidious and cruel, but because it is gay people kind of making fun of themselves, there's this air that there are certain things that are seen as cringe or humiliating when in fact they're mostly innocuous or actively fun to do, and that there shouldn't be shame around them at all, which I think is ultimately the message around being a bottom. It's something that I've spoken about before, the way that kind of movies set with teenagers as the main characters, they tend to have very specific ways of interacting with the gay community. A lot of them, especially the more modern ones, have involved like the internet, which is obviously a big part of this film as well. But there is also a kind of retro aspect here as well. A kind of a key part of the later part of the film is the public bathroom glory hole scene, where Andy nearly ends up sucking his own dad's dick. It's a lot, okay? It's a lot. Public bathrooms as like a cruising spot has been like a big part of gay history. This whole kind of situation where there is this like utopian aspect of these four gay teenagers have all found each other, they're all in the same friend group, and they're all supporting each other on this sexual journey. There is still also something covert about gay sex, because obviously people are trying to have sex in public bathrooms, one of whom is Andy's father, who is hinted at being queer throughout the movie, and eventually towards the end of the movie comes out as bisexual after nearly getting his dick sucked by his own son. It's a lot. This is a lot as a movie. There's this kind of subtext that despite being married to a woman and seemingly quite in charge of his own sexuality and having quite a healthy sexuality, Andy's father isn't someone who has had the same kind of gay homosociality that Andy has. There is like mentions of him being in the Navy, which is obviously very gay coded as well, but that doesn't really exist for him anymore, and he hasn't really had any avenues to explore his sexuality. Obviously it's a really weird way to connect with your son, but the fact that they're both kind of on a similar queer journey is really kind of sweet. And it's a kind of father-son bonding, again, inappropriate, obviously, but it's the kind of supportive father-son bonding that simply would not exist in any other movie in 2006. You know, Brokeback Mountain, I think it came out in 2005. There was so much homophobia around the reception of that movie, and that is considered to be one of the best, not even just one of the best gay movies of all time, one of the best movies of all time. So when a movie like this, which is ostensibly more low budget, deliberately lowbrow and crass, and is able to interact with queerness, with gay male identity, with explicit sex in a way that is just open and supportive, it's unsurprising to me that this didn't really take off with anybody, because the climate was just not there for it. And that makes me very sad, actually. Does this film look like a badger? I don't really believe so. I think that it is flawed, but not inherently reprehensible. I think it's genuinely transgressive in its almost utopian portrayal of explicit gay adolescence without sacrificing the humiliations that make up the sex comedy genre. I don't believe its more prejudiced portrayals have stood the test of time or serve to comment on their existence within the genre, but they're also the more minor parts of the movie that I don't think it's worth disregarding altogether. I have 2 recommendations for you. Both are a treat. You're going to be so happy watching them. The first is, there was a sequel to this movie. It's insane. It's really insane. RuPaul is there. So is Perez Hilton. Most of the original cast doesn't end up coming back, except for Jonah Blackman, who returns as Nico. It's definitely more racist than the original, unfortunately. It's also really weird as well. And there's some stuff in there that if I started describing it to you, you wouldn't believe me that it was actually there. So if you want to see these characters go on spring break and have a bunch of weird sex, then go seek out that movie. The second movie I'm going to recommend is the John Waters film, A Dirty Shame. Now, people are very down on John Waters' releases in the 2000s, but I think they're great. And A Dirty Shame is probably one of my favourite films of all time, actually. It's the closest John Waters film I could compare to another gay movie. And I'm speculating, but I do have to believe that he's been a huge influence over the tone and brashness of another gay movie. So what's this movie about? This movie is about a middle-aged woman who, after getting hit in the head, becomes a huge sex addict. She gets addicted to cunnilingus and accidentally causes a massive culture war around sexuality. This film has Johnny Knoxville in it. That should be enough for you to go see it. It's amazing. It's insane. And it might actually be my ideal movie. If you ask me what kind of movie I'd want to watch, it would be a movie with this exact plot. Thank you so much for listening. I will be back shortly with more bonus episodes covering new releases, as well as my regularly scheduled deep dive in October. If you'd like to stay updated, please make sure to follow me on Twitter at LikeABadgerPod. Follow me on Spotify, YouTube, and TikTok for full episodes and teasers. If you'd like to read more of my writing, you can go to ambercanwalk.com. I have posted a new poem. I'm releasing a new poetry chapbook at the end of September, so look out for that. I'm currently working on a very long piece that I still have not finished yet, and I have a piece that should be coming out in the middle of August about the David Cronenberg film The Shrouds, so look out for that as well. I'll link to it hopefully once it's out. All of my sources are in the description. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time. Bye bye!